warning to our viewers. What you are about to watch is a true story. The following program contains content that some viewers may find disturbing. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. January 17th, 2017. Leicester, England. A quiet residential neighborhood wakes to an ordinary Tuesday morning. But in one backyard, something extraordinary and horrifying is about to shatter the peace. A neighbor steps outside expecting nothing more than another quiet Tuesday. What they saw would haunt them forever. There, abandoned among the rubbish bins in the alleyway behind Cromer Street, sits a large suitcase. The kind you'd pack for a holiday. The kind that should be in someone's closet, not discarded like garbage. But something is terribly wrong. The zipper strains against its contents. The fabric bulges in places it shouldn't. And the shape, the unmistakable shape pressing against the material, sends ice through the neighbor's veins. The police are called. Officers arrive. And when they unzip that suitcase, they discover a nightmare that will haunt this community forever. Inside is the body of a 46-year-old mother, Kiran Daudia, strangled with her own scarf, her hands bound behind her back with black cable ties, her ankles secured behind her buttocks in a grotesque position, a bin liner placed over her head, suffocating her even in death, discarded, disposed of, treated like refuse. But the true horror of this case isn't just in what happened to Kiran Daudia. It's in who put her there, because captured on grainy security camera footage is a figure dragging that very suitcase through the streets of Leicester the night before, pulling it around corners, pausing, looking around, then continuing with his burden. And that figure isn't a stranger. It isn't some random predator who struck from the shadows. It's a man who had shared Kiran's bed for years, who had raised 2 children with her, who had lived under the same roof even after their divorce. It's her ex-husband, a man who simply couldn't accept that she had finally broken free. This is the story of how control turned to obsession, how divorce wasn't escape, and how one woman's fight for independence ended in the most brutal betrayal imaginable. Before we continue, I need to warn you. What you're about to hear is a true crime. This is a real story about a real woman whose life was violently taken from her. Some of the details in this case are deeply disturbing, involving domestic violence, murder, and the callous disposal of a human being. If you need to step away at any point, please do so. Viewer discretion is once again strongly advised. Welcome to the Shadow Files crime series. Tonight we venture into a nightmare so evil, it defies comprehension. Take a moment to hit subscribe, drop a like, and please let us know where you're watching from. And now, we begin. To understand how Kiran Daudia ended up in that suitcase, we need to go back to the beginning. Back to a young woman full of hope, standing on the threshold of what she believed would be a beautiful life. Kiran was born into a traditional Indian family raised with strong cultural values. In 1988, at just 18 years old, she entered into an arranged marriage with a man named Ashwin Daudia. The ceremony took place in India, families bringing together 2 young people with hopes for partnership, compatibility, and love. Kiran approached her marriage with optimism. She hoped this man she barely knew would become her companion through life. Shortly after the wedding, they immigrated to Leicester, England. A new country, a new language, a new culture to navigate while maintaining the traditions that grounded her. In those early years, 2 sons were born, Vibek, then Shivam. For Kiran, her children became her entire world, but beneath the surface, cracks were forming. Ashwin was conservative, traditional, content with factory work and evenings at the pub. He viewed himself as the head of the household, the dominant figure whose word was law. Kiran was different, curious, ambitious. She wanted more for herself and her sons, and Ashwin didn't like it. The warning signs emerged gradually: control, verbal abuse, physical intimidation. The boys noticed their mother diminishing, the light in her eyes dimming. They saw who their father really was. But here's what makes Kiran's story remarkable. She didn't stay diminished. Over the years, that quiet young bride transformed into a confident woman. She built a career at the next call center, 17 years of dedication. Colleagues described her as always happy, full of life, with a vibrant personality. She became fashionable, social, outgoing. She encouraged her sons academically, pushed them to become men who would respect women, unlike what they'd witnessed at home. With every step toward independence, Ashwin's resentment grew. Her confidence threatened his control. In 2014, after 26 years of marriage, Kiran filed for divorce, her declaration of freedom. But divorce didn't mean escape. They continued living in the same house on Lyme Road, separate lives under one roof. The boys sided with their mother, and Ashwin found himself isolated, watching his family exclude him, reject him, move forward without him. Then came hope. The house was being sold to Kiran's sister, an arrangement allowing Kiran to stay while forcing Ashwin to leave. True separation was coming. By January 2017, Kiran was 46 and finally seeing light at the end of the tunnel. She had dreams, peace, stability, maybe even romance. She joined a dating agency, allowing herself to imagine being loved properly, valued, respected. Her sons were thriving. Vibek was 25, Shivam was 17, both devoted to their mother. Family described her as simply beautiful, the backbone of the family, kind, generous, and angelic. Her perpetual smile, her charismatic nature, her many friendships. This wasn't a woman living in fear, this was a woman ready to truly live, and she was weeks away from complete freedom. January 16, 2017, circled on the calendar, the house sale completion date. After that, Ashwin would have to leave. No more shared space, no more control. That Monday morning, Kiran went to work like she had thousands of times before. An ordinary day. She expected an ordinary evening, maybe paperwork, dinner with her sons, a quiet moment to reflect on the new chapter about to begin. She had no idea January 16th would be her last day on Earth. She didn't know the man she'd divorced 3 years earlier had other plans. She didn't know his pride, his rage, his refusal to let go would cost her everything. Monday, January 16th, 2017. The day that was supposed to change everything. That morning, Kiran left for her shift at the next call center, just like always. Her shift would end at 2 p.m. The house sale was completing that day. Finally, after months of waiting, the legal transfer to her sister would be finalized. Meanwhile, back at the house on Lyme Road, Ashwin should have been packing. Boxing up his belongings, preparing to move out, starting his new life separate from the family that had rejected him. But he'd packed nothing, not a single box, not a single bag, because Ashwin had no intention of leaving. Around 2:20 p.m., Kiran arrived home from work. She walked through that door expecting to see progress, empty rooms, packed boxes, maybe Ashwin already gone. Instead, she found him sleeping. He hadn't even started. The confrontation that followed was inevitable. Years of resentment, frustration, and anger came pouring out. Neighbors would later report hearing arguing coming from the house, raised voices, the sound of a marriage that had died years ago finally being buried. And then Kiran said something that pushed Ashwin past the point of no return. In his later confession, he would recall her words. She told him to go to India to die. For Ashwin, this was the ultimate insult. His ex-wife wasn't just rejecting him. She was rejecting his culture, his heritage, everything he represented. In his mind, she was telling him he had no place in England, no place in this modern world she'd embraced, no place anywhere, and something inside him snapped. Ashwin would later claim, "I was angry. I lost control." He would try to paint this as a moment of passion, An argument that spiraled out of control, self-defense against a woman who had supposedly attacked him first. But the evidence tells a very different story. The assault began with Kiran fighting back. The pathologist would later document bruises, grazes, and cuts on her face, head, torso, and limbs, evidence of being gripped violently by the arms. Defensive wounds that told the story of a woman desperately trying to protect herself. But Ashwin was larger, stronger, and filled with years of wounded pride and rage. At some point during the struggle, he reached for her scarf. The very scarf Kiran was wearing that day, and he used it as a weapon. Personal, deliberate, intimate in the worst possible way. The pathologist's findings were clear: a prominent ligature mark encircling her neck, a fractured thyroid voice box. These injuries don't happen in seconds. Strangling someone to death takes time. Sustained pressure, sustained intent. This wasn't a momentary loss of control. This was murder. Imagine Kiran's final moments, the terror of realizing this man meant to kill her. The betrayal of seeing the face of her children's father, the man she'd once trusted with her life, above her as the world went dark. The desperate hope that somehow someone would intervene, but no one came. And then, silence fell over the house on Lyme Road. What Ashwin did next reveals his true nature, because if this had really been a tragic accident, a moment of lost control that he immediately regretted, you'd expect panic, remorse, a call to emergency services. Instead, what followed was cold, methodical calculation. He didn't call an ambulance, he didn't call the police, he didn't confess to his sons, he showed no remorse whatsoever. Instead, he began covering his tracks. First, he found a suitcase and attempted to force Kiran's body inside. But she didn't fit. So he went upstairs, calmly, deliberately, and retrieved a larger suitcase from the attic. The suitcase that would eventually be found in that alleyway. Then came the grotesque task of cramming his ex-wife's body into luggage. He placed a bin liner over her head. He used black cable ties to bind her hands behind her back and her ankles behind her buttocks, trussing her up like cargo, like she was nothing more than garbage to be disposed of. He wore latex gloves during this process, then tore them up. Fragments would later be found in the suitcase, a detail that would help seal his fate. His son Shivam was in the house during all of this. 17 years old, going about his afternoon having no idea his mother lay dead just rooms away. Ashwin carefully wheeled the suitcase into the backyard where his son wouldn't see it, wouldn't ask questions. And then Ashwin did something truly chilling. He went about his normal routine. Witnesses reported seeing him leave the house and return multiple times that afternoon, 4 separate trips. He was disposing of evidence. Kiran's phone, which would later be found wrapped in plastic bags on the roof of a nearby business, cleaning materials, her clothes, anything that might connect him to what he'd done. When Kiran's family called asking about her, wondering why she hadn't come home, Ashwin lied without hesitation. "I haven't seen her," he told them, his voice showing no emotion, no concern. As evening fell over Leicester, Ashwin prepared for the final act. That suitcase in the backyard needed to disappear. And in the darkness, he would drag it through the streets, thinking he'd gotten away with murder. He had no idea the cameras were watching. As evening fell on January 16th, Kiran's family was growing frantic. She hadn't come home. She wasn't answering her phone. And this was completely unlike her. Kiran was a devoted mother, a reliable employee, someone who always stayed in contact. They called Ashwin. He claimed ignorance, even acted concerned. "I haven't seen her," he told them. Just another lie in a growing web of deception. The family contacted police and a missing person report was filed. Officers arrived at the house on Lyme Road to interview Ashwin to piece together Kiran's last known movements, and immediately, something felt off. Detectives would later note that Ashwin seemed devoid of any emotion or concern. No tears, no panic, no desperate pleas for them to find his ex-wife. Just a flat, emotionless affect that sent up red flags for experienced investigators. They'd seen this before. The guilty often reveal themselves not through what they say, but through what they don't feel. Meanwhile, somewhere in Leicester, a suitcase sat in darkness in a back alley, waiting to be found. The morning of January 17th brought that discovery. A neighbor stepped into their backyard off Cromer Street, perhaps to start their day, perhaps just by chance. And there it was, a large suitcase abandoned near the rubbish bins. Something about it seemed wrong. The way it sat, the weight of it, the smell beginning to emerge, the wrongness that makes your skin crawl even when your brain hasn't yet caught up to what you're seeing. The call went out to police. Officers arrived, approached the suitcase, and prepared themselves for what they might find. When they unzipped it, the horror was immediate. Kieran's body bound with cable ties, a bin liner over her head, crammed inside and discarded like trash. A beloved mother, a woman weeks away from freedom, reduced to this. The investigation moved swiftly. Forensic officers descended on the Lyme Road house, processing every surface, every corner, looking for the story written in blood and fiber and DNA. And they found it. Drag marks led from the house to the alleyway where Kieran's body had been discovered, a trail of evidence Ashwin had left behind despite his attempts at covering up. But the most damning evidence came from something Ashwin couldn't control. The cameras. CCTV footage from neighborhood security systems captured everything. Grainy but unmistakable footage showed a figure pulling a large suitcase through the streets of Leicester on the evening of January 16th. The timestamp confirmed the timeline perfectly, and that figure was Ashwin Daudia. More footage showed him making multiple trips throughout the afternoon and evening, disposing of items, covering his tracks, trying to erase Kiran from existence. The forensic evidence from the suitcase itself told its own story. Those torn latex glove fragments Ashwin had tried to destroy, they contained DNA matching both him and Kiran, definitive proof that he'd handled her body. Phone records showed Kiran's mobile had been active until shortly after she arrived home, then went silent. That phone was later found wrapped in plastic bags on a nearby rooftop, thrown there by Ashwin in his disposal spree. Witness statements, physical evidence, digital trails. The case was building rapidly, each piece of evidence another nail in Ashwin's coffin. On January 19, 2017, just 2 days after Kieran's body was discovered, Ashwin Daudia was arrested and charged with murder. He was remanded into custody where he would remain until trial. The community was in shock. This factory worker, this father, this seemingly ordinary man had committed an act of unspeakable violence. But his sons weren't surprised. They'd lived with his violence, witnessed his control, watched their mother suffer for years. They knew exactly what their father was capable of. Now the rest of the world would learn it too. January 2018. Nearly a year after Kieran's murder, Leicester Crown Court became the stage where justice would finally be served. Ashwin Daudia entered his plea not guilty to murder. Lead prosecutor William Harbage QC stood before the jury and laid out a devastating case, a story of control, resentment, and calculated violence. He painted the picture methodically. The arranged marriage in 1988, the divorce in 2014 after 26 years of unhappiness. The continued cohabitation that had become unbearable, and then the house sale. The transaction that meant Ashwin would finally lose control over Kiran and his family. Harbage highlighted a detail that spoke volumes. After the divorce, Kiran had joined a dating agency. She was trying to move on, to find someone who would treat her with respect and love. For the prosecutor, this may have been a source of tension or resentment for the defendant, a careful understatement of the rage it must have provoked. Then came the medical evidence. The pathologist took the stand and described in clinical detail what had been done to Kieran. A prominent ligature mark encircling her neck. A fractured thyroid voice box. These weren't injuries from a momentary struggle. This was sustained strangulation, deliberate and intentional killing that required minutes of applied pressure. The CCTV footage was played for the jury. Grainy but unmistakable images of Ashwin Daudia dragging that suitcase through the streets of Leicester on the evening of January 16th. The timestamp didn't lie. The figure didn't lie. The forensic evidence mounted. Those latex glove fragments found in the suitcase containing DNA from both Ashwin and Kieran, proof positive that he'd handled her body while trying to cover his tracks. Her phone, found wrapped in plastic bags on a rooftop thrown there in his evidence disposal spree. And the lies. When Kieran's family called asking about her, Ashwin told them, "I haven't seen her." When police arrived to question him, he maintained his innocence, showed no emotion, no concern, just the flat affect of a man who believed he'd gotten away with murder. The prosecution's message was clear. This was premeditated violence followed by cold, calculated cover-up. Ashwin's defense was simple. He claimed he'd lost control and acted in self-defense. Taking the stand, speaking through a Gujarati interpreter, he told his version of events. "I was angry, I lost control," he said. He claimed Kieran had assaulted him first, that he was merely defending himself. He said he put his hand over her mouth to silence her, then forcefully squeezed her neck. His defense attorney, Mary Pryor QC, tried to paint him as a bit slow, implying diminished capacity, suggesting he wasn't sophisticated enough to plan and execute what the prosecution described. But the prosecution destroyed this narrative piece by piece. Judge Timothy Spencer QC made a critical observation that cut through the defense's argument. "Your cover-up reveals you're not without wit or cunning, because the evidence told a different story. The ligature strangulation using her own scarf, the cable ties binding her hands and feet, the bin liner over her head, the methodical disposal, first trying one suitcase, then calmly retrieving a larger one from the attic, the latex gloves, the multiple trips to dispose of evidence, the lies told with a straight face. This wasn't a loss of control. This was rage followed by cold, meticulous calculation. But one detail sent chills through the courtroom. Just 1 week before the murder, Kieran had made a joke to her son. They'd been talking about Ashwin, about the house sale, about finally being free, and Kieran had laughed and said, "What if he ends up killing me?" She'd laughed when she said it. A dark joke between mother and son about a man they both knew was dangerous but never truly believed would cross that final line. It wasn't funny anymore. Then came the victim impact statements, the family's anguish laid bare before the court. Vibek, the eldest son, had his statement read aloud by the prosecutor. "Our lives have been turned upside down and changed forever," it began. "We have lost a beautiful mother, daughter, sister, and auntie in the most brutal and horrifying manner." His words grew more raw. "Ashwin has wrecked our family. Kieran only wanted to live in peace with us. I have never felt so destroyed in my whole life. Why would he want to hurt us, his sons and our mother?" The family's collective statement painted a picture of the woman they'd lost. "We cannot even begin to describe the loss and emptiness in our hearts. Her perpetual smile will be missed every day of our lives by everyone who knew her. Kieran had lots of dreams and aspirations which were untimely taken away by this demonic act. Life without her will never be the same." Colleagues from Next, where Kieran had worked for 17 years, spoke of their devastation. The community that had known her struggled to comprehend how such violence could have been inflicted on someone so vibrant, so full of life. The jury retired to deliberate. They returned in just 2 hours and 43 minutes. They'd heard enough. The evidence was overwhelming. The verdict was clear: guilty of murder. February 2nd, 2018. The day judgment came for Ashwin Daudia. As the guilty verdict was read, something remarkable happened. For the first time throughout the entire trial, through weeks of testimony, through damning evidence, through his son's heartbreaking statements, Ashwin showed emotion. He sobbed. Not when confronted with what he'd done to Kieran, not when hearing how he'd destroyed his son's lives, but when faced with the consequences for himself. Judge Timothy Spencer QC rose to deliver sentencing, and his words were a scathing condemnation of everything Ashwin represented. In my judgment, you were arrogant, bullying, and bent upon maintaining control, the judge began. The course of destruction of your family was a course charted by you. Your selfish pride fueled your anger. He drew a stark contrast between the couple. Ashwin was less bright intellectually, yet his cover-up revealed cunning and calculation. Kieran, by contrast, was academically gifted, outgoing, fashionable, and westernized. A woman embracing life while Ashwin clung to outdated notions of dominance. You regarded yourself as the dominant figure in the marriage, Judge Spencer continued. You clung to the view you were entitled to control events. Even after the divorce, even after the courts had legally ended their union, Ashwin believed he owned Kieran, that her life was his to command. You've deprived this world of a bright and vibrant woman who had much to offer, who lived for her children, the judge said. You've deprived your two sons of their mother. The sentence: life imprisonment with a minimum term of 18 years before eligibility for parole. Ashwin was led away from the courtroom, finally stripped of the control he'd wielded like a weapon for so long. His sons remained, motherless, devastated, but determined to find strength in Kieran's memory and the values she'd instilled in them. Detective Sergeant Mark Wesley, who'd been part of the investigation team, spoke after the verdict. The evidence against Daudia was overwhelming, he said. CCTV work and forensic examinations helped us build a strong case against him. His words carried the weight of justice served. Through his own selfish, cowardly actions, Daudia has ripped this family apart, leaving two doting sons without a mother and other family members distraught and struggling to get over the pain and heartache he has caused. The case stood as an example of thorough, meticulous police work. Modern surveillance technology had captured what Ashwin thought he'd hidden. The East Midlands Special Operations Unit had dedicated countless hours to ensuring Kieran received justice. The family expressed profound gratitude to the investigators, the prosecutors, victim support services, their community, and everyone who'd stood by them through the ordeal. But they also offered a sobering reminder. Although today there has been justice for Kieran, they said, this does not take away our heartache. We will be living this sentence for the rest of our lives. Justice had been served. The guilty had been punished, but Kieran was still gone. This case represents far more than one murder in Leicester. It's a story that repeats itself too often. A story of control escalating to violence, of domestic abuse reaching its horrifying conclusion. The cultural pressures that bound Kiran and Ashwin together initially, arranged marriage, traditional expectations about gender roles and male authority, created a foundation for abuse when one person embraced change and the other refused to evolve. When a woman seeks independence from a controlling partner, how often does it end in tragedy? Statistics paint a grim picture. Leaving an abusive relationship is often the most dangerous time for victims. Kieran's dating agency membership, her simple attempt to find love again, to be valued and respected, shouldn't have been a death sentence. Yet for too many women, the act of moving on provokes lethal rage from men who believe they own their partners. The sons are left with haunting memories, including their mother's joke about their father killing her, words spoken with a laugh just days before they became reality. How many women around the world make similar dark jokes, never truly believing the men they fear would cross that final line? Ashwin's 18-year minimum term means he could walk free in his late 60s, potentially living decades more. Kieran will never age beyond 46, forever frozen in that moment of terror, forever remembered in that suitcase, forever denied the future she'd fought so hard to claim. Kiran Daudia spent 17 years helping customers at Next, always with a smile on her face. She spent 26 years as a devoted mother to 2 sons who loved her deeply. She spent her final years finding the courage to divorce a controlling husband and dream of a future without fear. On January 16, 2017, that future was just hours away. The house was sold, freedom was real. She could finally live in peace. And then Ashwin Daudia made a choice. If he couldn't control her life, he would end it. He strangled her with her own scarf. He bound her hands and feet with cable ties. He stuffed her body into a suitcase and wheeled her through the streets of Leicester like luggage, discarding her in an alleyway as if she were nothing. But CCTV cameras don't forget. DNA evidence doesn't lie. And Kieran's family refused to let her become just another statistic in the grim roll call of women killed by men who claimed to love them. Kiran was vibrant, beautiful, full of dreams and aspirations. She deserved to watch her sons grow into men. She deserved to find love again with someone who would cherish her. She deserved to age gracefully, to become a grandmother, to live out the peaceful future she'd fought so hard to claim. Instead, she became a reminder of a devastating truth. For too many women, leaving an abusive relationship is the most dangerous thing they'll ever do. If you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence, please reach out. Resources are available. You are not alone. Thank you for watching and for bearing witness to Kiran's story. Rest in peace, Kiran Daudia. You deserved so much better. If you like this coverage, join our community by subscribing and turning on notifications. Every subscriber makes it possible for us to keep creating content we're passionate about sharing with you.